towards at least the possibility of a second referendum on Scottish independence. And, of course, her biggest factor at the moment is how to keep Scotland in the European Union. That's despite a warning this morning that independence could see Scotland turn into what's been described as Greece without the sun. Well, let's talk to Daniel Mahoney, Head of Economics at the Centre for Policy Studies. Good morning.
Good morning.
There is a democratic logic to wanting to remain in the EU for Scotland, isn't there? I mean, that can't be denied, can it?
Absolutely. I wouldn't dispute that. There is a democratic logic. Obviously, Scotland voted to remain within the European Union while England voted to leave, and obviously Scotland has been dragged out. But what our report focuses on is the economic backdrop to any prospective independence. And the thing we particularly highlight is that Scotland's budget deficit is actually 3 times the level of the UK average. And that's actually higher than Greece. So it's around sort of 9 or 10% of GDP, which is near sort of financial crisis levels. And prospective independence, Scotland would have to take on that burden. And the reason why they can sustain high levels of public spending at the moment is because they pool risk with the rest of the UK.
Well, when we had the independence debate a couple of years ago, I mean, obviously there was an argument that should it go independent, there would still need to be some reliance on the Bank of England. Now, if they were in the EU and we were not, then there'd have to be a reliance on the European Central Bank, wouldn't there, instead? Now, why would that pose an issue?
Well, if they adopted the euro, that's correct. That would pose an issue for a couple of reasons. The Scottish economy is quite different to that in the euro area. For example, manufacturing is a much bigger part of employment in the euro area than Scotland. So that would open up to what we call asymmetric risks, i.e. where Scotland faces a risk that the Eurozone doesn't. And the ECB would find it very difficult to respond to such a risk. So that would be a concern.
I mean, you say if Scotland adopted the euro, they wouldn't really have any choice, would they?
Well, they could possibly adopt their own currency, but obviously there'd be lots of risks associated with that. They would struggle at the moment, actually, to adopt the euro because they wouldn't meet the convergence criteria. But should they meet the convergence criteria, unless they negotiate some sort of opt-out, they would have to join the euro with all the risks associated with that.
I mean, one thing that we've heard time and time again over the last few years is all about the fact that they can be a very rich country, so they say, because of North Sea oil and gas revenues. But, I mean, they've taken a pretty huge hit, haven't they? I mean, to what level?
Well, that's the change from when they were pushing for independence in 2013. So there's been an absolute collapse in exploration activity in the North Sea oil region. It's actually the lowest for 40 years, the exploration activity. So that's had a huge impact on finances, and that's why the budget deficit is so much higher than it was expected to be at that point in time. So I think now's the time, probably the worst time for Nicola Sturgeon to be pushing for independence from an economic perspective.
So if what you say is correct, you're saying there can be no serious economic argument at this point for independence. So is this just seeing a lot of political posturing, and with them knowing actually they can't push through on this?
Absolutely. So this analysis by the IFS was released about sort of 2-3 months ago, and they highlighted that Scotland's budget deficit is effectively what the UK's was at the financial crisis. So that would pose a huge risk, and now really isn't the time to be pushing for independence from an economic perspective. And I think what we would call for is for Nicola Sturgeon to be completely upfront about that and say, look, there are huge economic risks to doing this. And if she wants to pursue the democratic argument, that's obviously completely her prerogative. But we want to highlight the economic risks of pushing for independence at this time for Scotland.
Okay, Daniel, appreciate your thoughts this morning. Thanks very much indeed. We'd love to get a thought from Nicola Sturgeon on that one. Should she be watching, do feel free to get in touch. Hopefully we'll get some reaction later on in the day. Stay with us here on Sunday.